Our sixth question of the evening. If you are elected, how do you intend to have a two-way dialogue with Knutsford citizens?
No substitute for listening and talking. Regular surgeries throughout the constituency, but I'd also like to do some other things as well and start to use technology for things like digital voting, not in any way to exclude people, but with a view to trying to encourage more participation with younger people who are using things like social networks, for example. Regular contact with constituents and with businesses. And I suppose I talked about the heartbeat of the constituency, and I think sometimes you only get that actually by just doing the normal everyday things. You're shopping, you're going for a coffee, just being aware of what's going on locally. And I think that that takes a certain informality. And of course, it's a two-way process. You've got to be approachable and visible for people to want to talk to you and tell you what's going on.
Apology for not making an apology. The True English Poetry Party is something of an apology for a party. I don't apologise for that. I've stated quite clearly that my standing in this election is just a device to draw attention to poetry matters on a national basis, and that is really all that I have any expertise to talk about. So far as my presence in the constituency is concerned, I shall continue to perform true English poetry around the place and talk about it to anybody who wants to do so. I do have opinions on other matters, widely, more nationally and internationally, which might come into this evening's debate. I don't know, but that is what I would leave it at for the time being.
Obviously new technology. I'd love to be able to say that I'd have regular meetings like this, but I'm not sure that I could afford the £90 it's actually costing us. We are actually, by the way, having to pay to come here to talk to you tonight because Cheshire East wouldn't let us have the facility. So we're enjoying spending our money, but you know, seriously, on an MP salary, I could probably afford to come here and have regular dialogue with you. It is important, and that's why, again, I think it's important that you are living in the constituency so you can pop along to all the local activities which are taking place, hopefully get invited to them as well, and the more build-up of actually talking in less formal situations, I think you really do get to know about the people in your constituency, and that way you can represent them much more of their real ideas when you're taking those considerations at Westminster, which affect perhaps them back in Knutsford.
Absolutely vital question. And in a way, I'd like to get back to the days of Martin Bell. You know, he lived just down the road. He was always out and about, always popping up here and there, you know, speaking to local people, speaking to the people of Knutsford. I even remember when Neil Hamilton was the MP and he was out and about, believe it or not, a lot. You know, I don't want to get antagonistic with George. We are actually quite friendly to each other behind the scenes. But this question of representing the community, representing the constituency is absolutely vital. And you know how someone described George's visits to me? He called it George's Friday photo shoot, okay? And it's coming and it's going round many different places quickly, getting the shots for the paper, and that isn't a two-way dialogue. What I propose, using new technology, I've already proposed that I'll put my expenses online within a month of submitting them. How about putting my diary online? How about putting my diary in the Knutsford Guardian as well, showing people what I'm doing, showing people what their local MP is doing, and people can come along. They can come along and speak, and it's been, again, part of the community, being out and about, speaking to people. Thank you.
Well, I've heard it all now, Labour and Conservative not being antagonistic. We've obviously established a new world order in Knutsford.
I think it's a very good question, this, and it's an interesting question of how an MP can properly represent the views of a town. And I've tried several different approaches. The first is to be available, obviously, for surgeries, regular surgeries. I have them at the Jubilee Hall and at the Wilmslow Library and Hamforth Library and in Barnton and Rudd Heath and Witton, which is coming into the constituency at this election. So you have the surgeries and people come along with their problems. Most people these days, and I've noticed this over 9 years of being the MP, now contact you really by email or letter. There's a huge volume of correspondence every day, every week, which you have to deal with as an MP, often about very local issues. And very specific issues to them, a problem with their pension, a problem with their housing, a problem with the tax office or whatever. And that's the bulk of a constituency MP's caseload. But then there are bigger issues which affect the town. And in my experience, the two of the best ways of finding out what is the general consensus in the town, because obviously people have different views, are either to have public meetings, and I have had a number of public meetings, usually in this room actually, over recent years. We had a very stormy meeting on Manchester Airport, some may remember a few years ago, and their plans to open a new departure route over the town, which would have increased the noise in the town. And there was a public meeting which we organised. It enabled me to go to representatives to the airport and say the town was absolutely against this, that we would fight a massive campaign against it. I raised it in Parliament, had a special debate in Parliament, and off the back of that public meeting in this room, we stopped that happening. So there was no new departure route opened over the town, and we've still got one departure route, but we haven't got two departure routes, which would have made things even worse. And we've had public meetings on that. We've had public meetings on the incinerator issues around Northwich and how they might affect Knutsford and so on. But another way which I found is useful is actually conducting your own surveys, because it's what you'll find is that the public bodies like the local health service and the like are required to consult people on issues and changes to things. And the trouble is most people in the town have no idea that this consultation is taking place. It's advertised perhaps, maybe they buy an ad in the Guardian, or there's a notice goes up on the website, but basically people in the town don't really know. And a good example of that has been the plan by the Primary Care Trust here to take the 3 GP surgeries and put them on one location at some place in the town. And they, as you know, thought that Shaw Heath was a good place to put it. And what I did was, with the help of volunteers, we produced a survey and we delivered it to as many homes as we could in the constituency. It was all hand delivered, so we didn't have any money to do it, and it was just so not, you know, some people say, oh, well, you didn't make it to my street. We did deliver, I think, about 3,000 of these survey forms. And then we got them back and we looked at all the results of what people thought and what they wanted. And then I went to the Primary Care Trust and said, look, overwhelming view of this town is that we don't want the, we have concerns about the creating of a new medical centre and the merging of the 3 GP surgeries on one site. But we have particular concerns about the location of the new centre away from the town centre. And I found that doing the survey was a really powerful weapon when used against the local health bureaucracy in the form of the Primary Care Trust. So I think there are many different ways in which you can approach the job. But I take the view that if someone has a personal problem, they can come and see you and talk about it and have surgeries, and people, you know, I'm not prejudging at all the electorate's decision, but we've already got people saying, I want to book a surgery appointment in 2 weeks' time, and I'm saying, well, let's wait for the general election. But so you have that, but you also have to pick bigger issues and work out where there's something big that really wants to affect people. And what is interesting is that it teaches you one thing about politics or community life, which is all politics is local. And sometimes when we've had public meetings on big national issues, almost no one has turned up. I remember having calling a big public meeting on after 9/11 and how the government should respond and all of this, and about 12 people in the entire constituency came. And then when we had a public meeting on whether there should be a roundabout in the new A34 bypass around Old Liège, 1,200 people turned up. So it did teach me a pretty important lesson, which is politics is local and people will turn up if it's something that directly concerns them. And if I could pick up a point David made earlier about...
I think we've gone on quite long enough on this one.
Oh, well, I was just getting into my stride. But anyway, there we go.